Gracious divine ladies and gentlemen, I come to you today to speak of the framework, the historical framework of the present hour, and the magnificent pigmentations that can appear upon the canvas of your present life, because you believe that the colorations that presently exist are the same beautiful texture and consistency as in days of old or in the days of the beginning of life. One of the great problems of humanity is that they seem to regard past ages as possessed with a special quality of calmness or violence that exists then as a challenge to the present moment, to cause them to feel that this present moment is different than the past. We want all to understand, and understand clearly, that each moment is endowed by God with the same abilities to transcend tragedy, the same abilities to rise above circumstance, the same abilities to expand the domain of consciousness into the heart of divine thought, and to bring that thought down as an endowment of this precious jewel, the jewel of the present. Men should understand that the reservoir of the past holds certain charm and allure, for it represents an era of completion, whereas that which has not yet become reality represents the opportunities of the exercise of the imaginative faculties, the endowments of God resident within the soul. You are all painters after a fashion. You are all possessed with many of the self-same qualities of the Godhead, in lesser measure. But you are also endowed by God with all the qualities of the Godhead. You simply have not yet learned to express them and to release the thoughts that are godlike into the atmosphere, because quite frequently you regard yourselves as such a lesser figure than God. Remember the parable of the talents and try to understand that the endowments which God gave to you were intended by Him to represent that final achievement, which is the reunion of the prodigal son with the Father. Mankind have asked for and received certain experiences in the world of form, which are intended to challenge the very life within them to exercise its higher ranges rather than remain fixed in its consciousness and immovable. The ability to be mobile, the ability to expand the consciousness, is the endowment of a true creative artist. One who can understand that that which has never been within the range of that consciousness can be, which will endow man with the ability to draw the elements of life which he requires at a given moment forth from the universal and show them forth upon the screen of his life. It is not enough to simply aspire. Men must understand that in addition to aspiring, they must be able to act, and that action must be the action of God. as though the tracements of life were by his hands, the tracements of thought by his mind, the tracements of identity by his identity, without, for one moment, allowing yourselves to fall in consciousness into the pitfall of the human domain, the carnal mind, the strange experiences that never teach, but always maim. Rather, let men understand how quickly, if they will, the mind can be endowed with those delicate and fragile qualities of cosmic upreach that enable men to become creators of their own destiny. As we pause now to summon the cosmic energies of inspiration and pray the angelic host to increase the tempo of your own realization of the actuality of God, we ask you to put aside those temporary chastisements, even those you deserve, and reckon at last with that magnificent event when you have laid aside all weights, and as was long ago said, the weight of sin which so easily besets you. You find at last that you are a God-free being. And out of that domain of eternality, focalized into the area of the present, you successfully demonstrate that mastery and God control, which as a divine matrix will assist the forward evolution of the soul. You will have those magnificent passions of cosmic gratitude soaring within the domain of memory and consciousness, which will elevate you, ennoble you, and endow you with greater ability to use those talents which you have been given, and to realize that the expansion of those talents into the domain of the world is a part of the drama of this age. As was said long ago in Shakespeare, each one has his exits and his entrances. So let me remind you that whether those exits appear to loom before you as a fearsome manifestation, or the domain of those entrances can be kept before you as an entrance into newness of life, you will be able to exercise the same God control of your emotions, of your feelings, and say, O Holy Spirit, endow me with the ability to work the work of God before my fellow men, not as though it were mine in the outer physical sense, connected with cause-effect record and memory of my personal person, but only because it is the will of God working through me to endow the whole of life with that encanvassment of reality that is the transcendence of God made manifest in the face of life with all of its temporal viciousness. Often I was challenged with the opportunity to portray human viciousness and violence. That which I so frequently portrayed of constructivism in the world was the reality of God that is the reality of past, present, and future. For all divine reality has ever existed. It is simply that men have failed to outpicture it upon the screen of their own life. We come not to chastise, but to teach. For when the healing arts are practiced upon the soul, and the unguents of the Spirit are released by mind and heart, accepted and made a part of the contract of universal peace with the universe from the heart of God, each individual will understand that all that has been is a part of the range of his experience. One day to be a transmutative catalyst that will release only the goodness of perfection, the perfection of God, into the manifestation of his consciousness as drops of peace and life. When men understand these conveyances that are ever the activity of the higher powers of the universe, they will see that all lesser things, which they have clung to as though it were a temporary sustainment, ought to be abandoned in the face of the ocean of universal manifestation. That the soul of God ought to be the pond in which the soul should swim. That the consciousness of God ought to be the lave in which the soul is bathed. That the mind of God ought to become the sustainment and strength, yea, even the happiness of the very bones of man's existence. For the structure of his identity is one of universal grandeur. Spanning the pages of history and all events, man is able to transcend the fashion of his immediate life and raise himself in consciousness into that splendor of the divine domain in which immortals dwell. So long as he dwells in the veils of mortality, so long as he holds a consciousness of death and the cessation of his life, he will not be able to summon those pages of reality which see his life as coming in intervals both of day and night, with the certain promise of the eternal day spring from on high that shall visit him in his weakness and raise him into his strength. For the strength and the courage of God is the fabric of the soul of the divine artist. And the divine artist does execute upon the individual screen of man's life the manifestations of his perfection, yea, of his perfection forever. There is never a moment when the soul in reality is separated from God, for with the separation thereof, even the soul would cease to be. God sustains and God radiates. Does man then learn to possess the capacity to receive, to still the voices of the outer mind, the voices of darkness that are heard in so many lands and in so many minds, are stilled now, for the permanent day of God burns as a taper of reality in the sanctuary of his being. Then the healing arts and unguents of the Spirit will be accomplished, and the veil between the Holy of Holies will be rent in twain for each individual, as it already manifests in the universal Christ, pool of reality, troubled by the vibrations of those angels of record who see clearly the activities of man that have been and those which should be. And in this area of contrast, draw forth from the heart of the living God the projection of those actions which now shall accomplish in the domain of individual life and in the domain of universal life that which is the holy will of God, that which is to be found within the pigments of life, within the stroke of the master's brush in the master's hand. For as all things manifest in their full intended perfection, man will see at last that God intended from the beginning the domain of perfection for all, and that outworking in experience which takes place now is the result of the failure of men to comprehend the immensity of the divine power which heaven has placed within their reach, yea, within their grasp. I have said then that this is so, because I have learned through divine experience that it is. I trust through the power of faith and your belief that you shall cancel out and nullify the power of your unbelief. For man possesseth both, yet at given moments amplifies first the one and then the other, rising and falling in consciousness. Man is intended to be as stable as he possibly can, for a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. Will you then, forsaking the outer conceptions that have held you trapped in the mires of life, hold full faith in the immensity of the divine plan for yourself, for the universe? And because you make peace between your heart and the heart of God, allow the flow of those increments of immortality to seize you utterly and lift you up and shake you as a fleece, until at last you see the Sun of Righteousness shining in his strength. You see the beauty of life spread before you upon the grass and in the heavens and in the domain of your hope for the future and in your determination without wane that shall find that which you seek, shall manifest that which God seeks for all, which he has ever sought, which he has ever hoped for, which he always remains in consciousness. O beloved hearts, I make this plea for the grand activity of the artistry of the universe, created by the divine artist within. Thank you. Que u regarde.